Hi, everyone. My name is Tatiana Cole-Lavou, and this is Stronger, my LinkedIn newsletter. I also put it on video for you on YouTube, and I hope you enjoy this month's edition on communicating with authenticity. It's tough to communicate with authenticity when your emotion is high or when diplomacy is important. So let me give you two examples where being authentic, but also being diplomatic is really important. The first scenario happens right after you've had a very heated conversation with a family member or a long-standing argument or disagreement, and you kind of have to switch gears and you have to go into giving someone feedback about a recent presentation at work. So, can you clear your mind and can you go from that argument with your family member to having that official meeting? Can you compartmentalize the two events, or do you say to your colleague, listen, forgive me if I may be a little distracted. I just got off a tough call with my brother. You may feel the need to say this so that if you don't come across as authentic or not yourself, the person knows where you're coming from, depending on how much you know them. So the other scenario is probably a trickier one. You've just learned that you received a big promotion. So you're very excited and you're also scheduled to speak to a customer and deliver bad news on the project. How do you taper or how do you adjust your emotion so that you don't seem too enthusiastic as you deliver bad news? Can you shift your mindset from elation to professional concern? In this case, authenticity, sharing how you feel, would come across as being insensitive. So you have to taper that. Authenticity is the degree in which you or we can be true to our personality, our spirit, our true energy, our character, compared to external pressures that may help us or may make us seem insincere or as if we're pretending. So being authentic is often not easy, and communicating in tough situations like this makes it even harder. So to communicate with authenticity, you need to evaluate the circumstances for each situation. So you need to think of the pros and cons of being your true self. So here we're talking about being your true self, or as we say also, your shoes off self. Who is the authentic you? Because that is what people follow. That is what people believe. That is what people trust when you are communicating. So here are a few things to consider when you want to be authentic. The first one is, who is my audience? Are you talking to family members? Are you talking to colleagues and close friends? These people may be a little less judgmental when you drop your guard and you're completely yourself and you show more emotion. They're not going to uh, be critical of you. But if you're with another audience, you may not want to speak frankly or even harshly. So you need to be mindful of that. In some scenarios, taming the more emotional aspect of your true self, for me, it's using bad language sometimes. I know then I'm really communicating how I feel, but I only do that with close friends or with my running group. So you can see that it's beneficial when interacting, but when you're in the new acquaintance situation, you really need to tame it. So it requires knowing where you are, being aware of yourself and your communication style, and adapting to fit that style to your audience. The second piece is knowing your context. And what I mean by that is self-disclosure here is workplace professionals that are new to the workplace need to be a little bit more tapered. You can't just bring your true self day one. You've got to kind of see what the norms are and how everyone else is acting and work accordingly. So reading external cues, and don't become too comfortable too soon. You find quite often many people overshare and over disclose information that it's their true selves, but maybe it's not appropriate for the context. So when my children, to give you an example, when our kids were little, I would talk about them a lot, and I would probably not connect with people that didn't have kids, or their kids were older or they were past that. I wasn't reading my context well enough. So they made people have found my stories to be irrelevant or even just boring. So I've since learned to read my audience and be mindful of the context and express myself accordingly. So in this case, I assumed that everyone was interested in sharing my interests too. So another thing to think about, audience, context is culture. This is key here because you need to be aware of how culture can modify or so how in a culture you can modify your messages. So in, for example, a culture such as Japan, sharing too many personal stories or anecdotes may come across as make you seem less credible. But in a relationship-based cultures, for example, a culture in Italy or Brazil, not doing that may have you come across as too removed or too cold or too unrelational. So you want to, again, adapt to the culture. Then there's the communication channel. So you want to look at, it's easy to communicate emotions when you're speaking face to face, but when you are writing an email or when you're leaving a voice message, you want to bring your authentic self. So that's the closest human connection that you make. So that may be your, um, uh, you may have a preferred options for a situation. On the other hand, if you're trying to dial back some of your emotion, you may not want to work for that with them specifically, and work and write or pick up the phone or go on a voice message. You may want to visual message, a virtual message. You may want to just write an email. So you have to decide where your best self is. I always think that writing a message allows you to plan for that a little more. So one other thing to think about is your camera turned on or not, because you are communicating more of yourself when your camera is turned on, and especially with the volume of communication. I have a little kitty here. I'm going to be authentic and self-disclose. She's just woken up and rummaging through. All right, because my camera is turned on. So with the volume of communication in today's virtual world, we consider the camera as a face-to-face interaction. So if you really want to communicate your true self, it's best to do it face-to-face. But if you want to communicate in a virtual setting, the camera has to be turned on. There are times maybe you want to do separate from the emotion, and if you have the camera off, you may be able to relax a little more. We're all quite tired of Zoom. There's Zoom fatigue as we know it. So to give your audience a break in processing information, you may want to say, let's just talk on the phone. That may be better. Finally, you may want to think about how authentic your delivery is. We often consider a good speaker to be flawless and to have good conviction and to not have any fillers such as so, and you know. But interestingly enough, an author in the Harvard Business Review, Alison Shapiro, wrote an article where she talks about including some ums and ahs and showing that emotion makes people more real. They're not completely flawless. They're not, I don't want to say robotic, but they're not too perfect. So authenticity communicates transparency, which can involve sharing stories or revealing how you feel personally. So politicians and business professionals often hold back in being authentic at a risk of revealing too much as appearing vulnerable specifically. So another faux pas here, my Apple phone went off, so it was hard to turn it off. So politicians, business professionals often hold back on being authentic at a risk of revealing too much or appearing vulnerable on a public stage. So you need to weigh the pros and cons of how polished or how generic or authentic you need to be and consider some of these specifics. Authenticity is not something you proclaim. It's a trait you demonstrate. This is critical to remind you. So the more you practice, the more you feel okay with yourself, being your true self, it's going to show. Self-awareness is key. Maybe you want to consider watching yourself on video or getting feedback from 360 evaluations that people may give you. So it's really an important part of your professional and personal development. So authenticity ends up being what others see within you. And so try to ask some close friends, of course, of how you come across, especially in some situations. You may want to ask for some feedback if they watch you present at a meeting, give difficult feedback, give an information to a client, whatever that may be. So once you have those impressions, you can decide how much you want to reveal. So when I wrote this newsletter on communicating with authenticity, I had planned to do a LinkedIn Live in February, and I still plan to do it. The date is going to be April 11th. Part of what happened to me is my mother passed away. She was quite ill, but it was still unexpected. So in an effort to be authentic, I decided I can't be authentic and fake it and do a live. It was completely inappropriate. So Rescheduled it for April 11th. When that happens, we'll add that in the comments too if you want to see a little bit more of this. I look specifically to look at messages that may need some of these adjustments that I talked about, of being truly diplomatic, being authentic, but not completely revealing your information, how you feel, and having some of that be in written format or in other formats. And then what I want to do is look at a couple of videos of speakers who I perceive very authentic, but I'd like to discuss that with the audience that comes in. So if you have time, noon Eastern Standard Time, April 11th, we'll share the link as well. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for watching these. I really appreciate putting some long content on YouTube, and I appreciate you watching. Take care.